They say the body was found face down, her hands folded beneath her like she'd been praying. But the pool of blood beneath the altar said otherwise. It happened in 1878, in the kind of small Texas town that wasn't supposed to have secrets, the kind where the church bell was the only sound for miles, and the preacher's word was louder than law. But the body changed that. Not because it was a murder. Murder happens. No. It was because of where it happened and who they claimed didn't see it coming. They said her name was Elara Mae Thompson, a quiet woman with hands that stitched clothes for the town's babies, a soft smile that never missed a Sunday, and eyes that didn't belong in a place like Serenity Creek. Because Serenity Creek didn't tolerate questions. It tolerated only one thing: obedience. You won't find it on any map. Not anymore. The roads were rerouted, the documents redacted, the land swallowed by river and time, but it existed. Ask the old men in the valley, the ones who refuse to enter certain ruins, who go silent when you mention that name. Elara Mae Thompson, her death was never solved. Not because they couldn't, but because they wouldn't. Because what she saw before she died, what she whispered to one man, what she wrote in the pages, no one was supposed to find, wasn't just dangerous, it was blasphemy to the system that wore the cross like armor and wielded silence like a weapon. They built the church for control, not salvation. They built the town for obedience, not refuge. And when the truth surfaced, soaked in her blood, they did what all-powerful men do when the ritual breaks. They buried it with lies, with scripture, with fire. This is not a ghost story. It's a memory you were never meant to carry. But now you're here. And once you hear the name, once you see the pattern, once you feel that familiar chill when a truth you were never supposed to hear touches your skin, there is no going back. They called it Serenity Creek, a place born out of dust, pain, and the illusion of purity. No records exist on paper, but the land still remembers. It stood in the Brazos River Valley, cradled by cotton fields and drought-broken soil, a town carved by men who feared chaos more than death, men who traded freedom for structure and silence for control. After the war, Texas was bleeding, and like many places then, Serenity Creek rose from that wound like a scab, pretending to be skin. At its center stood the First Baptist Church, not grand, not towering, but tall enough to cast a shadow long and wide, its steeple pointed like a blade toward the sky, not to pray, but to threaten. This is where Reverend Josiah Blackwood stood, not behind the pulpit, but above it in spirit. A war chaplain with the voice of prophecy and the eyes of judgment. The people didn't just follow him, they obeyed. Beside him, Deacon Jedediah Kane, a man who looked carved from stone. He spoke rarely, but when he did, it was scripture, punishment, or both. And then there was Marcus Thorne, the land baron, owned the general store, owned the cotton gin, owned the men who worked them. He gave to the church, but only because he believed it secured his soul, like a deed secures land. These three weren't just leaders. They were the trinity of Serenity Creek. Blackwood preached, Kane enforced, Thorne possessed, and together they built a town that looked holy on the outside, but was locked tight from within. No wandering ideas, no outsiders, no deviation to the people. It was a fortress of righteousness, but to history it became a tomb with no marker, because something was already inside, before the town ever broke ground. Something watching through the eyes of good men. Something that wore salvation like a mask, and that mask was about to slip. October 14th, 1878. A Monday that started like every other. The air was dry, the sun was sharp, and the silence, thicker than usual. A boy named Eli, sent by his mother with preserves for the church pantry, walked up the chapel steps like he had 100 times before, but the door wasn't shut. The great oak doors, usually bolted during weekdays, stood ajar, just enough to whisper that something wasn't right. He stepped inside, bare feet on cool wooden floorboards, expecting to see pews, candles, the altar bathed in morning light. Instead, he was hit by a smell. Heavy, metallic, wrong. He turned the corner toward the altar and froze. There, on the floor, a woman. Her dress torn, her hair soaked and tangled in blood, one shoe missing, the other turned outward, like she'd tried to run. The altar cloth, once white, now smeared with a shade no hymn could wash away. Eli screamed, and the town came running, the churchyard filled with gasps and prayers, men pulling off hats, women clutching rosaries that didn't feel strong enough anymore. Someone rolled her over, and the name passed through the crowd like a curse. Elara May Thompson. 22. Soft-spoken, a seamstress orphaned but faithful. She sang in the choir every Sunday, sat in the third pew from the front. Now, her voice was gone, her blood soaked into the same boards where she'd once knelt to pray. They stood there, looking for someone to blame, someone to hang, but none could look each other in the eyes. And then the Trinity arrived, Reverend Blackwood, knees buckling as he dropped beside her, murmuring psalms, hands clenched, eyes dry. Thorn, jaw set, vowing justice before anyone asked for it. Cain, silent, surveying the crowd like a wolf that already knew which sheep was next. They locked the church, declared it unholy ground, told the people evil had crept in, but they didn't say. It had already been there. For years. By nightfall, the town had its story. The leaders stood before the congregation, lanterns swaying in the wind, faces lit from below like actors on a stage, and Reverend Blackwood spoke. He told them it was a drifter, a stranger no one had seen, a lost soul filled with madness, who entered sacred ground, defiled it, and vanished into the trees like a demon in smoke. He said, no member of Serenity Creek could do this, not one of their own, not someone who shared the hymns, the harvest, the covenant. Thorn backed him, claimed his men saw tracks by the river, a boot print, a broken branch, evidence of flight. Cain didn't speak, but he didn't need to. He stood there, arms folded, eyes like cold iron, daring anyone to question the tale. The town accepted it, almost too quickly. They needed it, because the other option, the darker one, would mean evil wasn't outside the gates. It was inside, eating bread with them, sharing pews, shaking hands after service. So they swallowed the story whole, even when their stomachs turned. No inquest, no investigation, no inquiry. They buried Elara without ceremony. No hymn, no sermon, just dirt and silence. And they closed the church, nailed the doors shut, declared it cursed ground, until further notice. But the lie didn't stop the whispers, because some remembered seeing Elara arguing with someone. Not a drifter, but someone local, someone respected. Some remembered how she suddenly left the choir 2 weeks before she died, stopped attending services, stopped speaking to anyone but the town's widowed schoolteacher. And some remembered the look on Blackwood's face when he saw her body. Not grief, not horror, recognition. The kind that doesn't come from a stranger, but from someone who already knew what he was going to find. 3 days later, the town returned to quiet. But it wasn't peace. It was paralysis. Children walked faster past the church. Women kept their curtains drawn, and men, the same men who once shook hands and smiled, now watched each other like wolves in a thinning pack. But one person didn't fall in line. Her name was Miriam Holt, a teacher, widowed young, unafraid of silence, and even less afraid of men who demanded it. She had taken Elara in when the girl first arrived, gave her a room, a job, a voice, and now she walked into the general store, locked eyes with Marcus Thorne, and asked a question no one else dared. What did Elara know that got her killed? Thorne didn't answer, just stared, his smile brittle, his knuckles white against the ledger. By nightfall, Miriam found a note pinned to her door. No words, just a drawing. A cross with a slit through its center, a sign known in older circles, one that meant, "Speak again and be unmade." But she wasn't frightened. She began asking questions, privately, quietly. She spoke with those who remembered Elara's last days, the school children, the pastor's maid, the deaf groundskeeper who saw more than people thought, and the picture grew darker. Elara had stopped going to choir. But not because she lost faith. She had been planning to leave, not just the town, but the church itself. She told Miriam something was wrong, something buried beneath the altar, something the elders prayed to, in secret, when no one was watching. And 1 week before her death, Elara had walked into that church after dark. Alone, she wasn't seen again until her body was found 3 days later. Miriam took her findings to Deacon Kane, not to accuse, but to ask for help. He listened, said nothing, and the next day, her home was burned to the ground. They said it was a chimney fire, but the chimney hadn't been used in days. Miriam survived. She was pulled from the wreckage by a passing farmer, her lungs black with smoke, her skin blistered, but her eyes, still sharp, still burning with purpose. She left Serenity Creek that night, carried downriver in a mule cart, half conscious, barely breathing, but alive. And what she carried with her wasn't just trauma. It was the final thread in a fabric unraveling from beneath the town's skin, because before the fire, she had written down everything, every conversation, every symbol, every whispered name Elara left behind. She wrapped the pages in oilcloth, buried them in a sealed tin, and handed them to the farmer who saved her, told him to deliver it to the postmaster in Waco. But the tin never arrived. The farmer disappeared, his name scratched out from local records. No obituary, no grave, just silence. And 2 weeks later, the postmaster who received the package, he hanged himself in his office. The coroner, a friend of Thorne's, called it grief. But the letters, Elara's last words, Miriam's warnings, they vanished. Not a scrap was found. It was like the earth itself had swallowed their truth. And in Serenity Creek, the church remained shut, but the 3 men grew stronger. Blackwood's sermons became more rare, more cryptic. He preached only to the elders now, behind closed doors. At night, Thorne's wealth doubled. Land changed hands with no records. Families disappeared quietly in the winter months. And Kane, he was always watching, as if he was guarding something, not from the outside, but from within. Whatever Elara had discovered, whatever Miriam tried to reveal, it wasn't just dangerous to speak aloud, it was forbidden. It would be easy to say this was just fear, just small-town superstition wrapped in grief and paranoia. But the pattern didn't stop at Serenity Creek. Across the Brazos River Valley, other towns began to report strange echoes. A church in Calhoun went silent overnight. Its entire congregation vanished, pews still warm, candles still burning. A woman in nearby Bosque County claimed her son was taken, not by men, but by shadows that stepped out of stained glass at dusk. And in Golson, 3 men were found hanging in the woods, each with the same slit-cross symbol carved into their chests, backwards, inverted, burned deep into the flesh. All of them had one thing in common: ties to Blackwood, or Cain, or Thorn. Serenity Creek wasn't just hiding something, it was exporting it, and the heart of it all still lay beneath that whitewashed church, now locked, boarded, and guarded at night by armed men who called themselves the Circle. They didn't speak, didn't smile. They simply stood at the church doors, hands on rifles, eyes like dead glass. But one person didn't leave: Thomas Ray, a blacksmith. Young, quiet, but observant, he had loved Elara from a distance. Too afraid to court her, too reverent to approach. But after her death, something inside him snapped. He didn't trust the story, didn't trust the smiles, didn't trust the silence. And one night, when the moon was a thin sickle and the dogs wouldn't stop howling, he snuck inside, through the back, past the cemetery, through the kitchen doors. And what he found beneath the pulpit didn't belong to any church. Beneath the pulpit was a hatch, iron-bound, slick with wax and something darker, hidden under the altar rug, like a sore under skin. Thomas pulled it open. The air that escaped wasn't just stale. It was wrong, like breath, from something that had never lived, but had always watched. He lowered himself down, one rung at a time, into darkness that didn't feel empty, but full. A chamber beneath the church, stone-lined, circular. And far older than the building above, candles lined the walls, melted into shapes that resembled faces, but melted, mouths open, eyes hollow. At the center of the room, a basin carved from black rock, too smooth, too perfect for tools of the time. The basin was filled with liquid, not water, not blood, but something between. It pulsed, and around it, symbols, older than scripture, etched deep into the stone. Thomas couldn't read them, but something in his body did. His skin went cold, his breath shallow, his mind whispering, "Run." But before he could, he heard a sound, not a voice, not footsteps. Breathing, slow, measured, like something just now waking up. Then, a figure stepped forward from the shadows. Not Blackwood, not Cain, but a woman. She was dressed in Elara's choir robe, but her face wasn't Elara's. It shifted, mouth trembling between smiles, eyes flickering like candlelight, and her voice, when it came, didn't echo in the room. It echoed inside his head. "You weren't supposed to see this." Thomas turned, climbed, didn't look back. He burst from the hatch, nailed it shut behind him, and ran into the trees, barefoot. He didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. He didn't sleep for 7. And when he finally did speak, his first words were, "They buried it alive. They buried it alive." That's what Thomas kept repeating over and over, to the sheriff, to the pastor of a neighboring town, to the priest who came from Austin with a cross made of ash and iron. They all wrote him off, called it madness, trauma, the fevered ramblings of a grief-struck boy. But Thomas wasn't sick. He was changing. He stopped eating, stopped speaking unless asked. He carried salt in his pockets, wouldn't walk in the church's shadow. And when he finally returned to the site, he brought a spade, a torch, and 3 men who believed in silence more than science. They dug in the chapel's foundation, past the altar, past the hatch, to a second layer hidden beneath stone and clay. What they found was not a crypt, it was a vault. No crosses, no saints, just a long corridor, lined with mirrors, each warped, each with cracks that seemed to crawl like veins toward the center. The men swore they saw their reflections move, but not mimic, react, like the glass was watching. At the end of the corridor, a door of black iron, covered in chains and wax seals, each seal etched with the same symbol Elara had drawn in her diary. A cross. Split at the center, with roots beneath it. They didn't open it. They couldn't. Something in their bones wouldn't let them. But Thomas pressed his palm against the metal and whispered one word. Elara. Behind the door, a voice answered, but it wasn't hers. It spoke in a tongue none of them recognized, but they felt it, in their teeth, in their hearts, in the blood behind their eyes. They fled. That night the church caught fire, but not from the outside. The flames began from the vault, and no one tried to put them out. By morning, nothing was left. The First Baptist Church of Serenity Creek, gone, reduced to ash and blackened bone-like beams, still smoldering, still whispering if you stood too close. No one in town claimed to see the fire start, but everyone watched it burn, and not one person cried. Reverend Blackwood was never seen again after that night. His home, boarded, his pulpit, empty, Deacon Kane stayed, but changed. He no longer walked with pride. He limped, as if something had taken part of him beneath that church, something he'd never recover. Marcus Thorne, he left town under escort. 3 wagons full of belongings, 6 armed riders. No destination declared, just gone. The town didn't mourn the church. They exhaled. But it wasn't relief. It was release, and in the weeks that followed, Serenity Creek began to vanish. Signs were pulled, records erased, maps redrawn, as if the land itself wanted to forget. But not everyone forgot. Thomas Ray. He kept the journal, the drawings, the memory, and decades later, on his deathbed, he passed them to a man who would become the first to truly listen, a writer, a historian, a believer in nothing. Until he read Elara's final pages, that man spent the next 10 years digging, not with shovels, but with questions. And he found them. Patterns, deaths, disappearances, all orbiting Serenity Creek, all wrapped in the same symbol, the split cross, the rooted seal, the mark of something ancient, not buried but fed. That writer died in 1962, found in his office, eyes wide, mouth open, journal missing, but one phrase was burned into the desk beneath his fingertips. They feed it with obedience, and that phrase is where we go next. They feed it with obedience, not blood, not sacrifice, not even prayer. Obedience. That's what Elara uncovered. That's what Thomas barely escaped. This wasn't a God that wanted worship. It wanted control, total unquestioned, obedient silence. And the church wasn't a temple. It was a mouth, a place where the willing were swallowed, where submission was not just expected, it was required. Because every time someone followed without question, every time someone bowed out of fear, every time someone accepted the lie to preserve the peace, it grew. And it wasn't bound to that church. It moved with them, followed Blackwood, followed Thorne, followed Kane into whatever came next. You think this story's old, a relic from the past. But look around. Modern sanctuaries, corporate halls, institutions dressed in white and stone. They echo the same architecture, same hierarchy, same unspoken demand. Believe, obey, don't ask, don't look too deep, because behind those smiling faces, beneath the stained glass, is that same hunger. And you've seen it, you've felt it, in churches, in schools, in boardrooms, in government. That chill when you question the official story. That silence when you speak a forbidden truth. That sudden vanishing of a voice that once made people think. They don't need to burn the truth anymore. They just bury it under obedience, just like they buried Elara, and just like they tried to bury this story. But you're still here, listening, awake. So now it's your turn. If you've felt it, if you've seen it, if you've carried questions too heavy for the world to answer, comment the phrase, "They buried it alive." Twice. Once for Elara, and once for the part of you they tried to keep asleep. After the fire, the land where the church once stood didn't stay empty for long. The elders said it would be turned into a garden, a place of healing. But no seeds took root, no grass grew, and no child would step foot on it. Even the dogs refused to cross the char line where the foundation had been. People whispered that at night you could still hear a choir, but backwards, like someone had taught the hymn to a mirror. One boy wandered too close and went missing. They found his shoes near the altar stones, but nothing else, and no one searched. By spring, half the town had moved away. The other half stopped speaking entirely. What had once been a settlement of faith and pride was now a husk, a ritual shell still twitching with the memory of what fed inside it. But something strange happened to the names. Blackwood, Thorn Cane, they vanished from record, not hidden, not buried, erased. Old census pages had blank spots, land deeds missing signatures, photographs with faces scratched out clean, as if reality itself was trying to cut out the infection. But there were survivors. One or two who refused to be silenced, a trapper who saw Cain weep by the ruins for hours, a woman who claimed Thorn's last words to her were, "It's not gone. It just changed clothes." And one letter, dated 1911, found behind a broken wall in a farmhouse 40 miles away. It read, "They moved it east, not far. A new building, more eyes, less faith. It wears a robe of reason now." No signature, but a faint marking in the corner, the split cross, and beneath it, roots spreading into veins. It wasn't just about Serenity Creek anymore. It never was. By the 1920s, the name Serenity Creek was gone from all maps. But the echo of it, that remained, a new church appeared in Waco. Modest, modern, built of pale limestone, claimed to be non-denominational, progressive. But those who entered said the sermons felt old, heavy. Scripture twisted into obedience, not salvation, and behind the pulpit hung a single symbol, a cross, split down the center, barely visible in the wood grain. But there, always there, people whispered that the preacher had no past, no childhood records, no hometown, no family. He called himself Shepherd Grant, but his real name was never written. He spoke with a voice that felt too calm, too practiced, like he'd heard every question before it was asked. And when he looked at you, it felt like confession, before you ever opened your mouth. The new church didn't demand money, didn't ask for prayers, only loyalty, obedience, and when asked what they believed in, the answer was always the same. We remember what came before, and we hold the door shut. Some said the sermons helped them, cured addictions, repaired marriages, removed doubt. But it wasn't healing. It was hollowing, taking something softly, piece by piece. And those who left said they heard voices in their dreams. Elara's name, spoken not as warning, but as bait. Something was reaching through memory, through bloodlines, trying to return, not as a demon, not as a ghost, but as belief itself, wearing flesh, wearing scripture, wearing trust like a veil. Because that's how it moves, through centuries, through systems, never burning, just becoming. It never needed to be worshipped. It only needed to be followed, blindly, repeatedly, generationally. And that's why the church was never about faith. Not really. It was about structure, layers, gates inside gates, where every man knew his place, and every doubt was punished before it became a question. That's what Elara saw, what she felt closing in around her. She wasn't killed because she lost belief. She was killed because she saw beneath it. She saw the system. And systems like this don't fear sin. They fear awareness. They don't bleed when you strike them. They bleed when you see them, Elara wrote in her final entry. It lives in hierarchy. It breathes through tradition. Its spine is made of titles and collars. And look around. How many collars still sit tight around necks? How many rituals still go unquestioned? How many truths still require permission before being spoken? It didn't die in Serenity Creek. It learned to wear new names, new uniforms. It learned how to hide inside organizations that claim to help, to heal, to guide. But they all speak the same coded language. Preserve order, honor the legacy, respect the chain. Same structure, same lie. And the deeper you go, the more the rooms start to look the same. Cold floors, dim lights, one door in, no windows out, just like the vault beneath the church. Because the vault wasn't built to contain something evil. It was built to train people to obey it, and we've been rebuilding it ever since. Not with bricks, but with habits. Obey, accept, repeat. They say evil is loud, obvious, grotesque. But that's a myth fed to children, so they never look for the real thing. Because true evil is procedural. It files forms. It stamps approvals. It smiles from pulpits and podiums. While building systems that choke truth at the root, Serenity Creek wasn't just a town. It was a prototype, a blueprint for quiet control. And once it succeeded, it didn't stay local. It scaled. The same 3 pillars kept appearing. A spiritual face, a financial spine, and an enforcer in the shadows. Blackwood, thorn, cane. You will see them in other names, other cities, other suits. But always the same shape. One speaks, one funds, one silences. That's how the organism spreads, not as a person, but as a pattern. Elara broke the pattern, or tried to. She turned her gaze inward. She stopped singing the script. And the moment she did, they couldn't let her live, because ideas don't die when you kill their speaker. They die when you kill the moment a listener begins to question. So they made her an example, not with a trial, not with exile, but with silence. No records, no justice, just a warning written in blood beneath the altar, a message to every future Elara. Don't look too close. Don't step out of line. Don't remember what we buried. But you're remembering now. And once you remember, you can't go back. You start to see the patterns, the masks, the way institutions all seem to rhyme with each other. Hospitals, courts, churches, councils, built to save you, but designed to watch you. The farther you fall into this, the more you start to realize they didn't just erase Serenity Creek to hide a murder. They erased it to protect a mechanism, because that's what it was, a machine, not with gears, but with belief. Elara's death was just the maintenance, a sacrifice to keep the machine running smoothly. And what was the machine built to do? To take power from the many and concentrate it in the hands of the 3, over and over, town to town, generation to generation. One speaks for God, one controls the land, one ensures silence. Reverend, landowner, enforcer. It's not superstition, it's design. Look at how the world still works. A preacher who tells you what's righteous, a banker who tells you what's valuable, and a man with a badge or a robe or a title who makes sure you stay in your place, if you ask the wrong questions. Serenity Creek wasn't unique. It was honest. It put all the parts in one place. And for a moment, you could see the whole machine running at once. Until Elara stepped between the gears. Her body was broken, but the rhythm was interrupted. And in that interruption, we can still learn something. Because if one woman with a voice and a journal could make the machine hesitate, what could you do with your eyes open and the script in your hands? They're counting on your obedience. They're counting on your comfort. But the truth, the kind they buried beneath that altar, the kind Thomas Ray never stopped whispering to himself, is this: you don't have to serve it. You don't have to obey it. You can see it. You can name it. And when enough people do that, the machine begins to crack. After the fire, after the silence, Serenity Creek didn't just fade, it infected. Buildings were torn down, stones scattered, but some things can't be destroyed. They only relocate. And what relocated was the method. By the 1950s, government records showed strange trends. Churches in isolated regions suddenly receiving anonymous funding, new construction sites near dried riverbeds, designs that matched the blueprints of First Baptist Serenity, down to the ratio of pews, the shape of the altar, the dimensions of the pulpit. These weren't coincidences. They were instructions, passed down, not through books, but through rituals disguised as traditions. The same sermons, the same phrases. Obedience brings light. Silence is sacred. He who doubts must kneel twice. It didn't matter what denomination the building claimed, Baptist, Methodist, non-denominational. The structure underneath was always the same: a vault, a chamber, a basin, sometimes dry, sometimes filled, but always waiting, and the records. When you trace the names of the men involved, the builders, the donors, the trustees, they always lead back to 3 lines, 3 families, each tied to the original Trinity: Blackwood, Thorne, Cain. The names may change, but the blood remains. You can follow the deeds, the bank transfers, the land gifts, all quietly orchestrated to continue the pattern, to feed the machine. And every few decades, the same thing happens. A woman, a teacher, a singer, a stranger. She asks questions. She writes them down. She disappears, and the machine keeps turning. But now, you've seen the pattern. You've seen the blueprint. And that means you're no longer part of the congregation. You're standing in the vault now, looking at the door, feeling the pressure from the other side. The only question left is, will you walk away, or will you listen deeper? You're still here. That means something. It means the spell didn't work. Not on you, not fully, because that's what this all is. A spell disguised as structure, a ritual disguised as tradition. It was never about God. It was never about truth. It was about focus, attention, the most sacred resource in this world. They don't need you to bleed. They just need you to look the other way. Every time you accept the official version, every time you swallow the headline, every time you nod along with the pastor, the politician, the professor, even when your gut twists, even when the room feels wrong, you're feeding it. And that's the genius of their design. Serenity Creek taught them this. Control doesn't come through force. It comes through routine. Wrap the chains in ritual, and the prisoner will kneel voluntarily. That's why Elara died. Not because she spoke, but because she refused to bow. She saw the space between the words. She saw how the hymns were timed with heartbeat, how the candles pulsed like breath, how the altar steps were the same height as military drills. It wasn't faith. It was programming, and she broke it. Even in death, she broke it, because her absence echoed louder than their sermons. And now, it's echoing in you. So stop for a second. Breathe. Feel the pressure in your chest. That's not fear, that's recognition. You've seen these patterns in your own life, in your town, in your work, in your church. You just didn't have a name for it. Now you do. It's not a demon. It's not a god. It's not even a man. It's a system, older than memory, hungrier than war, and it doesn't care what you believe, only that you obey. There was one thing Elara wrote, right before her last entry. I don't fear death. I fear being forgotten. And that line, that heartbeat on the page, is what they tried to erase more than anything else. Because remembrance is resistance. If you remember her, if you speak her name, if you feel that flicker of defiance rise in your chest when someone tells you to sit down and be quiet, then she didn't die in vain. They buried her body. Yes, but they couldn't bury what she saw. Because the truth, the real truth, never stays in the ground. It leaks, it seeps, it infects minds like yours. Slowly, powerfully. And once it touches you, you start to see the cracks in everything. In history, in headlines, in hymns. You start noticing when the questions vanish. When the curious are punished. When the smiling leaders all say the exact same words, like they're reading from a script. Because they are. Serenity Creek was just one scene in a longer play. The set changes, the costumes improve, but the plot stays the same. Control the story, control the people, rewrite what happened, then teach the lie and punish the truth. And still, Elara rises in whispers, in research, in questions you weren't supposed to ask. And if you've made it this far, you're not just watching, you're remembering. So I'll ask you this. What have you been told to forget? What truth did you once feel in your gut that the world laughed off, dismissed, silenced? Bring it back, write it down, say it out loud, speak her name, Elara May Thompson. Say it twice if you have to. Once for her voice, and once for yours. There's something about saying her name out loud that unsettles the air, as if the silence around her isn't just absence, it's resistance. Not from us, from it. Because the system doesn't fear violence, it fears memory, it fears unity of thought, it fears when someone speaks without permission. And Elara's name was never supposed to survive. No grave, no headstone, no hymnal, just redacted ledgers, ashes, and fear. But here you are, speaking it, hearing it. You're doing what they feared most. Remembering, and memory when sharpened becomes a weapon. That's why the archives are always guarded. Why old buildings are demolished with such urgency. Why forgotten towns are called ghost towns, as if the only thing left is a haunting. But the truth is, these places aren't haunted. They're sealed, like vaults, with names scratched off, coordinates lost, and records rewritten. But vaults don't erase, they preserve. And sometimes, someone like you finds the key. You who kept watching, who asked what no one else did, who realized that truth doesn't come from authority, it comes from fracture, from the moment something doesn't feel right. And instead of nodding, you pause, you question. And in that pause, the spell breaks, the chant loses rhythm, the pattern begins to bend. And behind that bend is the system exposed, naked, desperate, afraid, not of guns, not of violence, but of awakening. Because a man who sees can't be made to kneel the same way again. When Thomas Ray was an old man, long after the fire, long after the last map scrubbed the name, Serenity Creek, he was asked by a journalist if he regretted anything. He said only this: I regret not dragging the basin into the sun. He never explained what he meant, but he didn't have to, Because that basin, that black stone bowl, buried beneath the pulpit, wasn't just a relic. It was a symbol, a core, the place where obedience was turned into power, where submission was distilled into fuel for something not entirely human, not demon, not deity, but something older than either. It fed on the act of kneeling, on the surrender of will. And Thomas saw it move, saw the liquid within it shimmer when Blackwood spoke above it, saw the seals glow faintly when the town sang in unison. It wasn't metaphor. It wasn't superstition. It was a machine, a metaphysical engine, running on rituals so old they no longer needed understanding, only repetition. And when he stood above it, felt the breath of it rise through the stone, he knew. This wasn't about faith. This was about energy, about harvest, of the human spirit. And what frightened him most was that the basin wasn't unique. He believed there were others, he said. Wherever people bow out of fear, wherever silence is considered holy, you'll find another basin. It could be in a church, a courthouse, a school, a home, any place where obedience becomes survival, where truth is exchanged for tradition. He called them quiet engines. Running in basements, running behind policies, running beneath polite conversation. And now you've seen one, you've followed its blueprint, and somewhere, maybe in your own town, you're starting to wonder, where is my basin? You want to know how to find the basin in your world? It's not behind locked doors. It's behind locked thoughts. The places in your mind you've been trained not to go. Questions you've been taught not to ask. Traditions you uphold but no longer understand. That's where it hides. Because the basin isn't just physical, it's psychological. It's a ritual repeated so many times, it no longer needs explanation. Only compliance. And every time you follow without asking why, you pour a little more of yourself into it. That's how it fills. That's how it pulses. Think of it. How many moments in your life have felt wrong, but you stayed quiet? Because that's what was expected. When the boss made the decision that hurt everyone, but you nodded anyway. When the pastor twisted a scripture to serve control, but the room stayed still. When the teacher demanded memorization, but punished insight. These are modern rituals, and every ritual serves something. The question is, does it serve truth, or does it feed the basin? Elara stopped singing. She stopped kneeling. She stopped playing the part. And for that, she was erased, not out of malice, but necessity. Because systems like these don't fear rebellion. They fear disruption of the rhythm. They fear a woman who leaves the choir in silence. They fear a man who refuses to recite the pledge. They fear a mind that thinks in questions, not slogans. Because the moment that happens, the spell fractures, the chant loses its beat, and the basin dries. So what do you do now? You map the rituals. You watch the rhythms. You find the seams in the chant. And when you speak, don't just speak for Elara. Speak for the part of you that's still kneeling, the part waiting for permission to rise. It always begins the same way. A question that doesn't sit right. A look exchanged across a room when something official is announced. The tightening of your gut. The flicker in your chest. The internal voice that whispers, "This isn't real." But the moment you speak that doubt aloud, everything changes. That's when the machine notices you, not because you're dangerous, but because you're awakening. And awakenings are contagious. That's why they killed Elara, not because she was a threat alone, but because she might make others start to think, and thought, uncontrolled thought, is the one thing the basin cannot digest. It demands uniformity, ritual, submission dressed up as peace. So how do you fight something older than memory? Something without a face, without a headquarters, without a nation. You don't charge at it, you dissolve it. One moment at a time, you question what you've been told. You break patterns. You speak the names they tried to bury, because names carry codes. And Elara May Thompson's name is a cipher, a key to a door most men never dare open. The door that leads back to your original mind, before it was shaped, trimmed, and trained. Back to the part of you that remembered how to see, before obedience, before compromise, before fear. You still have that part inside you. It hasn't vanished, only silenced. And now you've heard her story. You've heard Thomas. You've traced the pattern. So I'll ask you plainly. Do you want to be another echo in the system? Or do you want to become the break in the rhythm? Say her name again. Elara May Thompson. Not because she was perfect, but because she remembered before they made her forget. You're not supposed to remember her. You're supposed to forget. Supposed to scroll. Supposed to nod and move on. But here you are, still listening, still watching, still pulling the thread they thought was cut. And by now, you've realized something, haven't you? This isn't just a story about a girl in a church, or a town that vanished from maps. It's a story about you. Because this world, the one we live in now, still follows the same script. The only thing they've changed is the costume. The preacher wears a badge now. The deacon sits behind a boardroom table. The enforcer uses policy instead of rope. But the rhythm is the same, and every time you follow it, you feed the thing under the floorboards. But every time you resist it, you starve it. You've been taught that silence is noble, that doubt is dangerous, that order is godly. But you weren't born to obey. You were born to see, to speak, to remember. And if you've made it this far, you're already waking up. You've started noticing the doors, the patterns, the words that make your pulse tighten when you hear them from certain mouths. That's no accident. That's your system trying to reject their system. So what happens next? What happens when enough people like you remember? When enough men trace the roots beneath the cross and realize what's really been growing all this time? I'll tell you. The basin cracks. The chant dies, and what was fed must finally be faced, not with weapons, but with will. Because the opposite of obedience isn't rebellion, it's awareness. You want to know why the lie worked for so long? Because it never presented itself as evil. It came wearing the face of safety, the voice of guidance, the hands of tradition. It never shouted. It whispered into pulpits, into policies, into prayers before dinner, and it taught you early that to question is to risk isolation, that silence is rewarded, that unity means sameness. But unity is not obedience, and peace is not control. They made obedience feel like virtue. They made kneeling feel like strength. But it was always surrender. Every day you follow without asking. You build the altar again. You lay the stone. You light the candles. You refill the basin. And yet, you can stop. Right now, you don't need to wait for permission. You don't need to wait for approval. You only need one thing: to remember. Because memory is the most forbidden act of all. To remember what you were before the system told you who to be. To remember the question that first made you feel alone. To remember Elara, who wasn't a prophet, wasn't a saint. She was just a woman who saw the machinery under the hymns, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. So look around. Every structure, every institution, every leader who speaks like a spellcaster instead of a man. Ask yourself, is this built on truth or on fear? Is this a voice or a script? You already know the answer. You've always known it. They just taught you to call that knowing a sin. But what if it's not? What if that knowing is your only chance to be free? You've come this far. So let's stop pretending this is just a story. This is a mirror, a dark one, held up to everything you were taught to trust. You see it now, don't you? The way the symbols repeat, the way the same three roles show up in every institution. The preacher, the financier, the enforcer, always three, always united in silence. They don't need to conspire, they just follow the same pattern. Passed down like a song no one remembers writing, but everyone knows how to hum. And if someone stops humming, they're marked, labeled unstable, dangerous, unwell. Just like Elara. But here's the truth, they can't unwrite. Awareness spreads faster than fear. It only takes one voice, one name, one refusal, to interrupt the system's chant. And you've interrupted it, by staying this long, by listening this deep, by remembering when they wanted you to forget. You've become the break in the pattern, and they know it. You'll feel it now, in how people flinch when you ask the wrong question, in how systems close ranks when you look too long at their foundations, in how your gut tells you, this room is shaped like a lie. Don't ignore it. That's your edge. That's your weapon. That's what they've worked so hard to silence. But not this time, not with you. Because once you see the basin, once you realize what it's been feeding on, you have a choice. Keep feeding it, or walk away from the altar, and start building something that doesn't need fear to function. Something that doesn't demand your silence to survive. Something real. Here's the final truth they don't want you to hear. The basin isn't theirs anymore. It's yours. Because the moment you saw it, the moment you named it, you inherited the burden, not to carry it, but to end it. That's what Elara tried. That's what Thomas preserved. And that's what you've stepped into now. A war not fought with guns, but with memory, with awareness, with refusal. And it's not loud, not dramatic, not something the world will celebrate. It happens in quiet moments, when you walk out of a place that once held you in fear, when you speak a forbidden truth in front of people who only speak in slogans, when you tell your son or your brother or your friend, this is not the only way. That's how the machine ends. One choice, one act, one man at a time. And no, you won't be praised for it. You won't be thanked. But you will know that you saw through it, that you remembered what others forgot, that you carried Elara's name into the light when the rest of the world was still bowing in the dark. So speak her name one more time, not for her, not even for you, but for the part of the system that's listening right now and knows it's been seen. Elara May Thompson. She didn't die for nothing. She died to mark the place where the lie was thinnest, so someone like you could step through, and you did. Now finish what she started. This isn't the end. It's the beginning of something most men never reach. A point of no return. You can go back. Pretend you never heard this. Let the rhythm of the world soothe you back into sleep, or you can walk forward, eyes open, mouth unsealed, because now you know what to look for. You'll see it everywhere, in handshakes that feel like oaths, in prayers that sound like programming, in meetings where decisions are made without questions. You'll see the basin under the floor, in hospitals, in schools, in social contracts disguised as love. You'll see how easily fear dresses up as virtue, how silence always serves the system, how obedience feeds something ancient and hungry. But you'll also see something else, something they didn't account for. Men like you, awake, unafraid to stand where others kneel, unwilling to bow just because that's the way it's always been. You won't save the world. This isn't about that. This is about reclaiming your own, your voice, your memory, your will. And every time you choose not to obey blindly, every time you name the pattern, every time you remind another man that he's not alone in what he feels, you crack the basin again and again and again, until there's nothing left to pour into it, until the chant dies, and all that's left is truth. Bare, raw, and finally yours. So speak her name, one last time, Elara May Thompson, and remember what they never wanted you to know. You don't need permission to see, you don't need a pulpit to speak, and you don't need a church to be free. If this moved something inside you, if you feel like a part of you just woke up, then comment it now. Twice. They buried it alive. They buried it alive. One for the lie, and one for the part of you that just crawled out of the dark. Now go, and let the silence break wherever you walk.